Welcome to class number 5. My goodness, 5 out of 8, moving right along. Would you please make sure you're comfortable in whatever chair or couch or whatever you're sitting on? If you need to sway back and forth, right to left a little bit to just feel seated. And we'll start with a very straight ahead grounding one where I ask you to breathe in and then drop into your body. So if you would please, on the next in-breath, breathe in and really notice the physical sensation of the air as it enters your nostrils. Go. Out breath takes care of itself. Drop your attention into your body. Notice the sensation of the support of the chair beneath your bottom, beneath your sit bones. If you have any difficulty noticing that sensation, then once again, sway a little right to left and see if you can notice the sensation of the support of the chair. It's that physical sensation that gives the message to the brain that says, it's okay, I'm supported, you can relax. And again, this grounding is intended to interrupt the stress response. Doesn't make the adrenaline disappear, it just interrupts. And if you want it to have time to dissipate, you also need to turn your mind to something that's pleasant or positive for you, maybe for 15 or 20 minutes, right? To allow your body to have time to chill. And let's see, would you please, for a moment, as you're sitting here, drop your attention into the memory that you made more intense last time, the memory you made more vivid. Just drop your attention into it, allow your eyes to close or your gaze to drop, and see if you can return to that place. Just go there and see what it feels like when you do. What does it feel like in your body? And just see if you can sustain your attention there for a moment. Isn't it interesting to realize you could do this anywhere? You could be in an emergency room and do this. Good. Just take a second and drop in. Yeah. Just allow yourself to feel that ease that you felt when you were in that place. And when you imagine it clearly with a lot of detail, your brain gets it. It can really help to settle the mind. And then the instruction's always the same. Remember, if your body's already filled with cortisol and adrenaline, you need to give it a little time to dissipate. So do have something else to turn your mind to for a couple of minutes afterward. And it could be anything of your choosing. Probably what you'll think of may be different than what I think of, but it could be a spiritual or religious figure or a prayer. It could be a favorite pet. If the pet's nearby, you could pet the pet. It could be putting your hand over your heart to just increase the amount of oxytocin that your brain is releasing. Okay. It could be imagining the waves at the seashore, if that's something that you find pleasing. I think I joked the first time, I'd say my husband would never think of that. He would think of the mountains. For him, that's what he remembers. Someone else, it might be another kind of spot in nature. Or maybe it's a favorite relative. So that's by way of remembering. What I'd like to ask you to do now is to recall, just for a moment, what the aspects of self-compassion practice are that I asked you to practice this week. It would be allowing yourself to notice when something's hard and to actually allow yourself to say to yourself, that was hard. Or some expression like it. It could be ouch or ugh, anything. And then the second one was, can I remember that it's part of being human, that everyone has moments of difficulty, right? And then the third one is, can I say something to myself that's kind instead of critical? So if I have something that doesn't go perfectly, I tend to think, oh, Judy, you're such a jerk. I do that, it's habit. But what about if I said to myself, hey, Judy, you're going to get through this. It's going to be okay. I'm here with you. Anything you'd say to a dear friend. Mm-hmm. So the topic for today, clearly we could have maybe 100 courses on this one, let alone one class. And the topic is challenging relationships. Mm-hmm. And I always figure that any relationship, but just because it's a relationship, is going to have challenges. You know, even wonderful relationships have challenges. It's just the nature of being in a relationship. But I think this topic is an important one. And there are a lot of issues and things we can look at. I'll tell you a few things I want to look at when we're doing this after the break. I want to show you a simple technique that is kind of a fun practice, I think, for noticing how we are ourselves as we're entering into a relationship, and then perhaps noticing how someone else is. That's the practice. And you can even break it down and say, I don't want to do the whole thing. I just want to do part of it. That's fine. So we'll spend a little time on that, and I'll tell you where that came from and why I'm showing it to you. The other things I'd like to touch on toward the end of the class are big topics that I think come up in relationships, particularly when our relationship is primarily with someone who has a serious illness. So one is the topic of how do we deal with the fact that someone might feel like they don't want to be a burden? And how does that impact us? How does that impact our children if we have kids? How does it impact friendships? I think that's a big topic, and it's worth spending a little time on. It may or may not be front and center for you, because I know everyone's different, but I think it's worth mentioning. Another thing I think is worth mentioning is symptoms. You know, we talk about how someone's behaving. Do they have a lot of pain? Do they have a lot of nausea? I had a friend that had cancer for many, many years. He had multiple myeloma, lived with it for 13 years. He said nausea was the worst thing. It was worse than anything else he had. I thought that was interesting that he saw that as being so totally distracting and upsetting for him. So that's a reality. I think another one that's worth talking about is just the subject of intimacy. And that can include sexuality, but doesn't have to. But sometimes when someone has a lot of illness issues, because they're in the hospital or they're through treatment, we forget about affection and touching and the things that just bring us closer. And I think that's worth remembering too. And the last one, there are many more I could talk about, I know that, but the last one I want to remember to mention is a way of communicating that's referred to. You may know this. Are you familiar with the program Nonviolent Communication? So the idea is, can I say what's bothering me in a way that doesn't be accusatory? So that way it leaves more space to relate within it, which I think is really important. And in some cases, last but not least, it could be that our person or our partner was always a really difficult person. Who knows why? Because of their childhood, because of things they went through. But we're in a particular kind of relationship with them now when we're providing care. And finding a way to balance that, you know, maybe something we can work with some of these things and do, or maybe something we want to get a little help with, right? Because it can be difficult. So I think I'll dive in with the practice that I wanted to show you, make sure we've got time for that first. I'll tell you where it came from, and that will include some things we've done earlier in the class. There is a program that's called the Grace Training. It was developed by a Zen Buddhist teacher who also is a medical anthropologist named Joan Halifax, who worked in the field of death and dying for her entire career. And somewhere in the midst of all that, she said, you know, these doctors and nurses that work in this field, the palliative care clinicians, have no training for how to keep their balance in the middle of being around really difficult stuff and suffering. She said, that's really a tough thing. And she said, we have enough research now about the science of compassion, of the neuroscience of how our brains work and deal with stress, that she said she thinks she could put something together. She wanted to put something together that would help people in the field while they're being doctors in the hospital and nurses in the hospital, how they could balance themselves right in the middle of life. And I talked with her about it. And I said, don't you think that would apply to people that are home caregivers as well? And she said, absolutely. There's no question, because it's hard. It's hard to keep our balance when things are a little bit crazy. And things get crazy when you're living with serious illness and you're caring about it and caring for it with anyone. So that practice, this grace training, I will have in your resources some links so you can look it up. It's currently taught online as well as in person in New Mexico. So I'm guessing, unless you happen to live in New Mexico, you might be more interested in the online version. But the interesting thing about it to me, as we're going through this course material, is that it has 5 steps. GRACE is an acronym that one of Joan Halifax's assistants said, oh, you could call this GRACE. And she said, okay. So that'll help people remember it. But the G was for gathering your attention, which is very much like the grounding practice that we did first. And the R is for recall your intention, which Joan Halifax says keeps us grounded. Not neurologically grounded, but it helps keep us emotionally and morally grounded. And then the third, the A of grace, this is a bit of a stretch. She calls it a word that's used, I'm told, in the field of psychology, which is attunement, ATTUNEMENT. So attunement, all I could think of was tuning a piano. She said, no, that's not what she meant. Attunement meant, are you kind of in touch with what's going on? I'll leave it there, but it's that A practice that we're going to do today. And I'll just mention what the 4th and 5th were, but we'll go over them later in the course. One of them is called considering what will really serve. And the last one is, how do you end a conversation, a particular situation, in a way that feels balanced and okay to you and to the other person? So it's useful, interesting stuff. All of these steps can be done in a breath. The attunement's probably a slightly longer one that you might go, I can't do that fast. And you might say, there's one step of it I like. And you can pick what you like, and it's up to you. But I'll show you how you could do it fast and what it is. So in her teaching, she talks about, before, let's say for a doctor or nurse or for ourselves, before we walk into the room to care for our person, how am I today? How am I doing physically? How am I doing emotionally? And how am I doing in my mind? I thought, what do you mean? I mean, all the things in my mind, I've got a monkey mind. She said, no, what are your narratives? What are your stories about what's going on? Well, I like that. I thought that's important because we have preconceptions and stories about the person we're caring for, about how we think they feel. We've got all these stories. So I got to think about this practice. The first half, this is half of A. This is about myself. And second, I'm going to wonder how my partner's doing in those same 3 areas. And then I'm guessing, I'm not sure, or I can ask. But for myself, I'm just thinking about it. I call it, it's nice to know who's walking into the room with me when I walk into the room. I don't mean other people. I mean, what version of me is walking into the room to be with these people? Like, is it me that was up all night? Is it me that's sleep deprived? Is it me that has a migraine headache? Is it me that has cramps? Is it me that has a stomach ache or nausea? Any of these things affect who I am, how I talk, how I behave. They do, how not? This is my physical being that I live in. Do I have a bad back? Do I have an achy knee? We can blow them off. We can ignore them, and probably we usually do, but it doesn't hurt to be, the same thing with noticing. Doesn't hurt to notice this is happening. It is affecting me. Just noticing it, not trying to have a magic wand that'll fix things that are there anyway. The second one, how am I doing emotionally? Well, that could mean a million things too, but it may be neutral. There may be nothing for me to think of, or it might be, well, I'm really still upset about the argument we had this morning. Doesn't mean that I have to, again, I don't have to go in and wave a magic wand and make it go away. Just be aware. My knee hurts and I'm upset about our argument. That's who I am right now today. And the third one, what narratives or stories do I have about this interaction I'm about to have with another person? Maybe I think, so my husband's name is Tom. I'll use Tom as an example. Maybe I think, oh, Tom's going to be angry with me when I tell him that we've got a doctor's appointment coming up. Like, this is so irrelevant. Like, he shouldn't be angry at me. But I have this story that he's going to be, right? I've preset this in my mind how he's going to be. So these stories I have, not helpful, especially if I have an assumption about how someone else is going to feel, probably affects them. We all affect each other, right? Yeah. So that's the first half of grace. The first half of the attunement practice of grace. Want to try it for a second? All right. How about make it right this minute? I'm going to ask you to, like we often do, I'm going to ask you to gently allow your eyes to close or your gaze to drop and imagine your person that you care for. Just imagine them. And imagine you're about to go into a room and make them lunch or give them their meds or whatever you're going to do. Or just say, how are you doing right now? But imagine you're about to and you haven't done it yet. And just for a second, how are you doing physically? I'm going to ask you to go through these fast. Physically, how am I right now? It might be neutral, or you might have something you can notice. And how am I emotionally, either with regard to my person or something totally different that I'm worried about? Am I emotionally afraid of a scan that's coming up for my person? Am I emotionally worried about one of my kids that argued with me last night on the phone? Or what the doctor said they wanted. I mean, it could be a lot of things emotionally that are there for me. And then, do I have any narratives or stories about what's going to happen when I walk in the room? Have I already decided in my own mind this is how it's going to go? Okay. So, if you could open your eyes again, please. So, you will be not surprised at all to hear that the second part of attune is how do we attune ourselves to what the other person is feeling physically, emotionally, and what their narratives might be. I really want to out the words respect and humility right at the top. I cannot know what my husband is feeling. I cannot know what he's the only person inside of him, just like I'm the only person inside of me. So for me to make a lot of assumptions about how he is, not fair. You know, I can ask him if I want to. He can tell me or not, but I don't know. What I can do, let's say if I walk in the room to do something with him, I can stop to think, wonder how Tom's doing today, right now, physically. I might know he's got an arthritic knee, gives him a lot of pain. You know, I know he's got that. I know that can affect him. And I might say, how's your knee? I could ask him, but I'd know more about it. Or I could just say, how you doing? And he could say, I'm exhausted. I need to nap right now. You know, it might feel that way. I don't know. But that's physically. Emotionally, I don't know about your person. Tom probably won't tell me that. If I ask him, how are you doing emotionally? I'll go, what? Are you crazy? But I might have a sense of something I know he's worried about. A scan was a good example if your person has cancer. I think I told you one of my friends that has cancer here, he calls it scanxiety, like anxiety mixed with scan, because he said that's exactly how he feels before he has a scan. But if you know one's coming up, then you know your person's probably got some emotional stuff around that. Or if you know another round of chemo is about to start, and if you know that the chemo rounds for your person are particularly difficult, they have a lot of nausea and difficulty around them, then you'll know that that may be something your person's worrying about. If you know in your family that something is difficult for your kids right now, you might know that that's affecting your person. I don't know. But you may have a sense of what's happening emotionally. And same thing for yourself. If you know you just had an argument in the morning, you may know that your person could still be irritated by it, even if you feel fine. Say, it's over, I'm glad. And your person might still be upset about it. But just allowing yourself to realize, again, what version of your person is in the room with you, what might be happening. And then the one that I love the best, because I think this is so something I forget, is what are my person's stories about me or about the situation? What are their stories? I'll give you an example. I think it's gotten a little better lately, but in general, my husband tends to think I'm really bossy. I don't think I'm bossy, but if I suggest or tell him to, do anything that I think is for his own good, he thinks I'm being bossy, and he can get really pissed off with that. So I can find a different way to say what I'm saying, but I have this story in my mind. That's how he's going to feel. So that's my preconception. And if I walk in there assuming that, he can probably pick that up from me. I mean, we're all such empathic creatures. We really are. And what I didn't talk about at the beginning of this class, and I should have, is just the subject of empathy. Yeah. Who can tell me what you think empathy is in a common expression? So, anticipating how someone else feels. We are actually hardwired to have empathy. Isn't that interesting? It makes sense when you think about it. How have human beings survived all this time? Why do we take care of our young? Years ago in caveman days, where did that come from? There's this empathy. When someone else has a need, and you tend to want to care for them. That's part of the caregiving mammalian caregiving response. Empathy is really powerful, really powerful. Do you know that when you prime or strengthen the way you're aware of what you feel in your body, this is really interesting. It's a sidelight, but when you do that, then your empathy for someone else is strengthened. It's the same. I'm taught by the neuroscientists, the same neuronal pathways that tell us how we're feeling in our own bodies are the ones that tell us how we think someone else is feeling. But we have this capacity to be empathic. Some people have really strong empathy that they're just born with, just like some people can, are good high jumpers. Some people have really strong empathy, sometimes too strong, so strong that they get overwhelmed by it. Some people have very little empathy. It's been learned by the scientists that we can train empathy. I thought that was interesting. But empathy is there. You have a sense of how your person's feeling, whether they talk to you or not. And again, with respect and humility, I can't say I know exactly how they feel, but I probably get a sense of it internally. Within my gut, somehow I have a sense of how my person's doing. So I just share that with you. And they probably have a sense of how you're doing, right? If you're angry or you're upset, even if you go in there smiling, say, I'm fine, they probably get it, how you're feeling. Yeah, we all do that. That's both a blessing and sometimes it's hard, makes things hard. But I think empathy is important to remember. So here we go. We've just talked about, we're going to try to guess how our person, guesstimate how our person's doing physically, how they're doing emotionally. How about what the stories are about us? So I would ask you that. Does your person have stories about you that they probably tell themselves? So let's try that again. So for a moment, could you close your eyes or allow your gaze to drop and imagine your person? Imagine you've just walked into the room and you're talking with them about whatever you're doing, making lunch or going to the doctors or whatever you're doing. And just see if you can just guess, imagine how might they be feeling in their bodies today? How might they be feeling emotionally today? And what might their stories be about you? It doesn't have to be negative. It just, do they have stories that are part of their equipment, part of who they are? Yeah. So you can imagine in the grace practice, Joan Halifax is not suggesting that a busy doctor or nurse is going to spend 20 minutes on this. It's like, before you walk into the room, stop for a minute. Notice how you're doing physically, emotionally, mentally. After you walk in the room, in addition to all the physiological things you have to do, just stop. How do I think my person's doing, my patient's doing, in terms of their physical well-being, their emotions? Do I know they're scared about an upcoming scan? Do I know that? I mean, that's going to affect how they talk to me and how they hear what I say. And do they have stories about me? And as a clinician, what might the stories be? It might have to do with how, for a clinician, it might have to do with how they look. If I walk in the room as a chaplain, there's an old lady. That's what they notice. And who knows, they may have all kinds of preconceptions about that. So this is all about seeing our way through that a little bit. For your practice this week, what I would suggest, try one. Don't try to do both parts. Both parts is a lot, unless you want to. You're welcome to if you want to. But I would say at least do one. At least start to notice who you are, who's walking into the room with you, and get a little practice with that. And then if you wish to pick up the second part, see if you can try. How do I think my person's doing? And what do I think their stories are? And see if that gives you more information. As one of my doctor friends like to say, he said, gee, and this is such a doctor term, he said, once I've grounded myself and once I've remembered why, recalled my intention, and I figured out how I'm doing, and I've noticed how the other person's doing, he said, I've got a lot more data points. That's a doctor scientist term, data points. It gives me a lot more information with which to do whatever's coming next. And it's true for us too. It's just helpful information, if nothing else. Thoughts or questions about any of this? Okay. Well, have fun with it. I think it's a neat practice. I really do. And I don't always remember that. I don't always remember anything. But, if I've got a couple of favorite things, then I try to remember those. So starting next week, I'm going to start giving you a list that says what works for me. And it mentions all the practices and something you can check off and go, oh, I forgot about that one. Maybe I want to try that again. So I hope that'll be helpful. So we have a whole another half hour for what I consider really important topics. And this is not practices for you to do. It's just a conversation that I'd like to have with you. And it is about the topics that I mentioned, which are the being a burden topic, the pain and nausea topic, the intimacy topic, and the nonviolent communication topic. Do you worry about or hear that your person has concerns about being a burden? I've had people tell me they're more worried about their spouse than they are about themselves because they think they're such a burden, because they know their spouse is going through a lot of hard stuff. Or they're worried about how their person's going to survive if they have a prognosis that's short and they know they won't live very long. They may have a lot of things they're worried about, but one is that being a burden on their spouse, on their children. Has anyone had the experience, and I hope you may not have, I hope you haven't, but have you ever had the experience of someone who pushes people away because he or she wants to protect other people? Could be because they don't want them around because they feel too sick. Could be because they want to protect them. I had one patient in the hospital, wonderful guy. He had one son. He adored his son. His son was in Santa Barbara at college. His son wanted to come home and be with him. And he was not allowing it because he wanted to protect his son. And finally, it got through to him. His son, it'd be good for his son to be with him. That would be a good thing. But it was hard for him to go there because he was so used to trying to protect his son from anything that he thought was perhaps dangerous for his son. And I think it's worth helping someone realize that it can be enriching to a kid. It's not a good thing to be around illness ever for any of us. Who wants to do that? But if you've got that as part of your life, usually the experience for a youngster, if they're not put in danger and they're not scared, is that they become more empathic. They have a richer understanding of the world. They become less afraid of illness, of when other people are ill. So it usually is not a bad thing, even though it's not something any one of us would ever have wanted. I think that's important to help understand. How about this? With the whole burden thing, has anyone felt like either your person or you are becoming more isolated? Any isolation? Yeah. I think that's really a natural thing to happen for a couple of reasons. All right, so raise your hand if you've ever had some people that you would expect to show up who have disappeared. And then you felt, yeah, that's fairly common. It's like, what? I thought this person was a close friend and they're suddenly not showing up. So that happens with some people. I've just gotten to understand over time whether it hurts my heart or not. Some people just can't be around someone with serious illness and they drop away, not because they're bad people or they don't like me. They just don't know how. They're often afraid. They don't know what to say. They don't know what to do. Hard to say, but that's not uncommon. Are there some people, raise your hand if there's some people that show up no matter what? Maybe people you wouldn't expect. Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. I've often been surprised. Look at that. I didn't think that person even remembered my name. They're here every day. They're always here with me. So people are different that way. And I think it helps to understand how common that is. Both are pretty common. This is another common thing. How many have ever had people say something really stupid around someone that's sick? Someone that you wish that, how could you have said that? Are you nuts? That's common too. There's a book. I didn't put this in your resources. Maybe I should add it. It's called Bedside Manners. And it was compiled by a woman named Cindy Perlis that ran the Arts for Recovery program at UCSF. And she used to have people come in and paint one day a week. And when they were painting, they would talk to each other and they would say, can you believe that my brother-in-law just said this? And so she was hearing all these things over time. And she asked them, would it be okay if she gathered these things that people have heard? And she has one page that's all about things you should never say to someone that's sick, things that you should say. And it's a fun, funny book. It's called Bedside Manners. They used to sell it in the gift shop at UCSF, but I think it's also on Amazon. So I want to say something more about this isolation idea. Research has shown, a lot of studies have shown that isolation is not healthy. It's not good for us. It's not good for us. It's not good for our person. And yet it's almost inevitable with serious illness that we have a lot of it. It could be that our person's feeling too ill to be around anyone. If they're throwing up all the time, they don't want to be around people. But getting totally isolated is not okay. And it's not okay for the care partner. I always encourage people to do two things. One is, can you notice if you are becoming overly isolated? And the words that the social psychologists use for this is it's fine to have alone time. It's fine to have solitude, but it's not okay to be chronically isolated. Chronic isolation has a whole cascade of negative impacts on us. So what I'm asking you to do is, can you notice if your aloneness, your isolation, whatever shape it takes for you, can you notice if it's becoming chronic? And no one's going to notice but you, right? No one else is going to know. You'll know. If you feel like, whoops, I'm overdoing it, then go ahead and get your solitude time. But reach out to somebody a little bit. And there may not be many people you want to reach out to. I know when I'm feeling like I need solitude, I can tell you, I don't want to chit chat with people about much of anything. So there are not many people I would want to talk to. But I could call my friend Ellen. I could call my friend Carol. And I could say, I don't want to talk about anything. I just want to hear your voice. And they would be fine with that. Or I'd say, tell me about your kids or about what movie you saw. I said, I just want to connect with somebody. Is that okay? And they The people that we care about enough to feel like we could call them, they generally get that. Here's another one you can do. You can do this for you and your person both if you like, if they're willing. You can put boundaries around a visit. So you can call someone up and say, you know, we haven't seen you in a long time. We really miss you. We'd love to see you, but my person's tired or I'm tired. Can you come over on Tuesday for a half an hour between 2 o'clock and 2:30, or make whatever numbers you want? Look how different that is, right? You don't have the visitor feeling like they should stay longer because if they leave too soon, your feelings will be hurt. Right? If you don't do something like that, they're going to stick around because they feel like you need them to stick around. The other side of it is, if you don't do that, you'll be inclined to stick around. Oh, I haven't seen this person for a long time. I should stay with them for a long time. But you may know up front that's not okay for you. You don't want to, it's not okay. So if you put boundaries around it that are very clear in the beginning, it's a relief to both people, right? And you could say, I've got some cranberry juice. That's all I've got. Can you come over for a half an hour between 2:30 and 3 o'clock or whatever? You make it up or whatever works for you both. But I would say if that feels like something that might be okay, to consider it. You might consider it as well for people that are already visiting, that you think, I love seeing them, but it was too long. That was too exhausting. I want to see them again, but I want it to be shorter. I find that to be so helpful. So you can kind of put it in your bag of tricks if you like. So there are articles that I put in your resources. But these are articles on the benefits of being a caregiver. And they absolutely do not say it's all sunshine and roses to be a caregiver. They don't begin to say that. But they do point out that research has shown, studies have shown, there is some positive benefit to it. Or you'll find one that shows there's decreased mortality amongst caregivers. There's increased good feelings because it's speculated that it has to do with the response of caring for children, even if you don't have children, whatever that is within us, that's a natural response to care for others, is what helps it be positive for us when we give care. It's negative and positive both, but I think it's important to remember that. And if you want to bring those up, if you wish to discuss it in a conversation about burden, I'm not suggesting you want to throw research articles at someone, but you might share with them if there's any part of any of those articles that makes sense to you, that there have been some studies that show that it actually can be helpful to care for another person. Another thing that I found useful to explain to the person receiving care is that all they really need to do is to accept it, to be willing to receive it, and to say thank you. That means so much. Some people will do it naturally, other people may not. But it's hard, just like it can be hard for some people to receive compassion. I showed you the survey scales on that. Same thing, it's hard to not be independent. So there are lots of reasons why it can be hard to receive care. But if you can let someone know this actually is helpful to me as well as to you, and it would make me feel better if you could just open your arms up and let me in. Same thing about letting in children that you want to push away because you want to protect them. So these are big, big topics, but I didn't want to miss them. And as Joan Halifax would say, I think it's worth sitting with it a little. But just in your own awareness, just let this be in your heart and in your mind a bit, and kind of think about it, reflect on it a little bit. I'm going to go through the next 3 very big topics very briefly. The topics of pain and nausea make me think of 2 things: the research that was done by the fellow in Australia, in Adelaide, Australia, and the research that was done to create a new form of therapy called pain reprocessing therapy. And there's a book on it. I think it's by David Gordon. I don't know how commonly it's available, but take a look at it. It's this idea that the anxiety and the catastrophizing around pain can actually make pain worse. In the case of the fellow from Australia, he specifically is looking at that. And his name is Lorimer Moseley. And I love his work, and I love that he has cartoon books to work with it. So I'll just have to post those for you. But it's this idea that if we can catastrophize less about the pain, then the experienced pain may be lessened because of that, which makes sense to me. Yeah, emotions do affect our feelings. And for Lorimer Moseley, I know he's got a website that's particularly good that then shows the different books that he's developed. The third topic, again, this has a lot to do with relationship, and this is going to be different for every one of us in here, but it's the idea of intimacy. And I think it's so important not to let serious illness interfere with intimacy. And I'm not talking about sexuality, I'm not referring to intercourse, I'm referring to just intimacy, to closeness, to being willing to touch, to hug if your person can tolerate it with pain that they might be feeling. It's easy to forget that stuff unless you have a long habit of it and you've always kissed and hugged a lot every day anyway. But if not, then I would say that's another thing to sit with and consider. If you're comfortable and if your person's comfortable, it's easy to become isolated in the way of not experiencing touch. And it can be as simple as holding a person's hand or touching the shoulder and rubbing the shoulder a little bit. But considering if that feels right to you with your person, it may or may not, but considering it. There's an article that I have put in your resources. Of all things, it's from AARP magazine, AARP, and it's talking about just this in a very simple way. It's very user-friendly, but you kind of look through it and see a couple of the steps they suggest. But a lot of it comes to what feels okay to you and what feels okay to your person, and not having a lot of expectations or a lot of demands or expectations, either one of you, just letting things be open. And the last of these quick topics I want to remember to mention is nonviolent communication. It was developed by a man named Marshall Rosenberg from Detroit, who I was surprised to find was kind of a tough guy, but he liked this idea. And nonviolent communications, it's like in the same way that Gandhi or Martin Luther King would have used nonviolent, but it's applying it to communications rather than to sitting on a bus. Can I have communications that are not violent? And that the way he looks at them, and I did post a book of his for you online. Can I express my needs in a way that doesn't say, because you were like this, I feel this way, rather expressing them when I hear these words, it makes me feel sad. So it kind of flips the argument around to putting the, I wouldn't say burden, but putting the anger, resentment, upsetedness with me and the way something lands with me. The reason being, if we tell someone else it's their fault from the very first sentence, you did that, that's so horrible, then it becomes an argument back and forth about, then if they're like me, they'll say to you, yeah, well, you did this. And then it goes back and forth with just anger. Now, that said, nonviolent communications is extraordinarily effective. I think you'd have fun looking at it, regardless of that. If your person happens to be someone with a personality disorder, or someone that's narcissistic, or someone that has psychological equipment that makes them difficult, and they always were difficult and hard for you to interact with, then I think that is the sort of difficulty that really would benefit from the help of a psychologist that can help you with it, or help you and your husband if he's willing, or he might not be, or she might not be, but it can at least help you with how you're dealing with that. So I'll just part with my usual line: may the goodness that arises through our practice be for the good of all beings everywhere, including ourselves. So may you have a good week. May you get some rest as best you can. And I wish you well with your practice.